Preparing to live stream. This meeting is being live streamed. Got it. Okay. Okay, so hello, we are now live on YouTube. Apologies to people watching for the delay in starting. We were having a couple of technical issues getting it to live stream on YouTube, so I apologize for that. I would like to welcome you to the Scottish Pagan Federation and our conference. And today this panel is going to be a panel about mental health and paganism. And so just as we start, I would like to introduce myself, and then I would like to to give my two guests the opportunity to introduce themselves. But before I do that, I just want to go over a couple of little bits of housekeeping with today, and that's just around that the panel will be just under an hour, because I'm aware we've started a little late. And we're going to be discussing a few questions around mental health and paganism. That's going to be sort of the thing. As it is live, I have asked my colleagues to just be mindful of that as well. And so I would like to start with introducing myself. My name is Matthew Cormack. I am the Mental Health and Wellbeing Officer for the Scottish Pagan Federation. I'm also the Regional Coordinator for South East Scotland for the Scottish Pagan Federation. I am a qualified counsellor, and I am a registered member of the British Association for Counselling and Psychotherapy, also known as BACP. I also am involved with the BACP Spirituality Division. I am on the BACP Spirituality Division Executive. I have very strong interest in mental health and spirituality and faith. So that's a bit about who I am. So I would just like to pass over. Lucia, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hey, hello, I'm Lucia Harrington. I grew up with two pagan parents who are also psychologists, so there's quite an interesting thing for me to talk about today. I am a community work student and would identify as Buddhist and pagan. And I was also a mental health advocate and campaigner in my youth. And I'm very interested to talk about the intersection between religion and mental health today.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. And Archie.
Okay, I'm Archie Hamilton. I'm a clinical hypnotherapist and psychotherapist. I have been a healer as well for about 40 years. I've been doing my hypnotherapy for about 8. I've been involved in the pagan community now for about 4 or 5 years. I was a lurker before that for probably 5 or 10, but if you would have given me a thing, I am probably a sort of energy worker and have been for 40 years. I've identified as such for that. So yeah, that's a bit about me.
That's perfect. And thank you both so much for agreeing to be here and for taking the time to share here. And also, Lucia, I just want to acknowledge your father was hoping to be here but isn't able to. But hopefully we'll be able to do something similar again in the future. That would be lovely. So the first question that I was really hoping that we could explore together was around, what do you think the main issues facing pagans around mental health are today?
Okay, I'll start since there's no volunteers. I think they've probably got the same degree as everybody else at the moment. I think basically at the end of the day, most people were coming out of lockdown. It's almost like PTSD. We've been in a wartime mentality. We've got through it, and then every time we think we're getting through it, something else comes along. The other big thing with pagans, I find, is that it's admitting to mental health people that you are pagan. It's something else. It's another blow to stop you going to that door, and it's big enough doors. Males struggle to go to the door because of the machoism. Pagans struggle with extra. So anybody struggling at the moment to get these doors open, and there's also a bit of a fear that people are going to assume that some of your pagan beliefs are part of your mental health problem. So that's my own little bit of it at the moment. So I'll let somebody carry on now.
Yeah, so I have to agree is that pagans are just people like everyone else who have the same life struggles as everyone else, especially coming out of a pandemic. We're all very, that's been really detrimental to a lot of people's mental health. But yeah, as Archie said, that coming forward to a therapist, if you were to say you believed in magic, healing, ritual, because of the stigmatism in our society around that, there is a fear that explaining that's a part of your everyday life could be diagnosed as an issue. And there has been case studies where this has happened culturally from people from, also particularly with people from colour, where they talk about you maybe hearing voices, a part of hearing the voices of ancestors coming to them. That's not treated seriously, even though, say, in other, it's not like prayer is something that is effectively doing that same thing. It's like that communion with a higher being or more connected to everyone around you, and it should be treated on an equal footing. But I would say that speaking to with clinicians today, there is so much more awareness and so much understanding that we are living in such diverse times, people of all different faiths and spiritualities. Paganism, there's way more awareness about paganism today, and it shouldn't be something that people should be scared of, because I think if you have a good therapist and you went up to them and said, this is my religious belief, this is my practice, etc., they would respect that as the same as any other practitioner. And if they don't, I think that's going to be more of a minority, and that's just a reason to leave, report it, and move on to someone who does understand and will treat you equally like anyone else.
Yeah. I suppose I'm really struck with what you were both saying. Archie, you mentioned about issues for men that can also be an issue for being able to access services. And Lucia, you mentioned about people of color's experiences and backgrounds being pathologized as well. And I suppose that's something that really resonates with me around accessibility and really considering that intersectionality around people and accessing mental health services. Because that can be a big issue. Currently, we're in Scotland, and that's where we are, but also just acknowledging that across the UK and across the world, these accesses to mental health support is very, very different. And I suppose for me, really, really agreeing with what's been said around those issues of accessibility of, do I feel safe to share my beliefs, my faith? Is something that really sits with me. I suppose for me as a therapist, if someone chooses to share about their faith, for me that's a symbol of trust, of someone who's opening up to me about something that has meaning in their life. And I feel it's very important to honor that, to honor what someone is sharing, and to do my best to understand it without making judgments. I think that would be very harmful, to make judgments about somebody's belief system. And I suppose also acknowledging issues around the pandemic, and that we've had all these extra stresses over the last couple of years. And these are issues facing people as we're coming out of lockdown, not just pagans, but also pagans. Yeah, it feels like there's sort of a real mix of issues there for what people are experiencing and what people are dealing with at the moment.
I think also I'd just like to say, like, I don't know if this is still a problem for young people who've grown up in pagan families, but for me personally, I've only been able to come out about my experience with paganism as an adult, not a child, because my mum was so scared of like social services getting involved because of, I had a very happy, secure upbringing, but because in the 90s there was the satanic abuse scandals, there was a fear that if we came forward about being pagans, they would see that as a threat. And so for me growing up, that definitely affected my mental health, because I felt like I had a whole lot of fear, a lot of anxiety, a lot of shame around my family's beliefs, when there shouldn't have been that shame. And I don't think that is the case for young people today, but I wouldn't know exactly. But I do think it's also a struggle for young families when they're trying to fit in with like moms at school gates and making sure their kid is a part of accepted that community, especially when schooling is a thing where a lot of schools in local areas are religious, maybe Christian, and may not recognize paganism as might not know much about it, and therefore it could seem as so different. But really having these conversations and destigmatizing paganism in general is a way to make people more feel safe and to come out if they feel othered or excluded in any way.
Yeah,
I think things are definitely better. Go back to my youth, as it certainly was, it was a Christian school, it was this, you were expected to believe these things. Definitely, I think it's better now, but I think there's still some stigma. But saying that, there's stigma between religions. All religions have got stigma. Certain schools wouldn't want this. We are living in a society that segregates on religion. So we need to just need to be happy that we're now getting in amongst the main ones and we're actually being accepted as a religion. Hail the census form. Thank you, Steph, by the way, for that one. So yeah, it's at least it has moved things forward. So yeah, that's the big thing.
Yeah,
have moved forward.
I suppose hearing you talk about that experience at the school gates and schools growing up, that sort of brings to my mind that feeling of isolation, of being othered, of not being able to interact with people because of something that has been used to separate us from others. And that's something that really sits with me. I suppose also acknowledging what you were saying, Archie, about the census, just for anyone watching who doesn't know, the 2022 Scottish census has, for the first time in history, pagan as a specific tick box in the different categories of faith. And that is the first time that has ever happened. And that has partly came about due to decades of campaigning by the Scottish Pagan Federation. I think that increased visibility for pagans being able to be on a census form is sort of a sign of how much things have perhaps evolved from when the three of us have grown up in our respective times. So I was hoping to move on to our next question, which I know that we've already sort of touched on a little, and that's there is some research that has suggested that some pagans may be afraid of sharing their faith with mental health professionals because there's a fear that they may be pathologized, where their beliefs will be seen as a form of mental illness, or are afraid that that faith may be used against them, such as fears that that might lead to social work involvement or other issues. And so I'm just curious to hear what people's thoughts are around these worries, these fears.
I'll start. I think definitely there is a fear. I can see, I do a lot of work on Zoom. I do all my work on Zoom. So I see it almost a lifting when somebody says to me, and they've actually come out with the fact that what particular paganism or which part of paganism, they will tell me their views. And when they see me accepting it, it's like, wow, it's amazing. And you think, why are they thinking that still in this day and age? Because it should just be accepted as, I suppose, if you were Christian, you wouldn't expect anybody, a full-blown Christian, you wouldn't expect anybody to query you at all about it. So why should we still be having that question of, wow, he's accepting? And I think that's something that it does need to be lifted a little bit more. As I say, I can only talk for myself when I'm working with clients. It doesn't matter to me what person's religion is. You've got to just listen to what they say, and their beliefs can be a great benefit to them, a great help to them. So yeah.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think that I think in terms, because I have gone to counselling and CBT before, and I never felt it was a reason for me to bring up my spiritual beliefs because it was nothing to do with what I was going through. But I think if I had brought it up, I would be worried that even though they might say accept it on paper, they might still think I'm a bit weird, and I'd feel like then less less open to sharing because they already see me in this category. But I will say, that this is also something that, say, some of my Christian friends have grown up with when they're engaging with young people. That's that same thing of like, they know we won't discriminate against you, but there's that, again, that feeling of being othered that contributes to this feeling of, in your own head, that maybe like I'm not good enough. And then that can lead to anxiety. And even though it might not be expressing, it might not be manifest, especially in relation to religion, it can contribute to feelings that a lot of people already have, such as not feeling good enough, feeling anxious about being accepted, and all these different things, because affect, and especially because like pagan ritual, whatever, that's very abnormal to like normal society, that kind of thing. You kind of live, there's sometimes you can feel this dual sense of identity between your religious self and your everyday self, and that in itself can be quite quite confusing to navigate within like meeting new people in a professional settings, how much you should be open about this, that kind of thing. It's something I'm always wrestling with, and especially as a community worker, where your place in the community is very crucial to how successful you are in your workplace. All these fears can contribute to feeling more anxious.
I can certainly relate to what you're saying about that. How open do I be with in sort of my professional life? I can really relate to that feeling of, is this okay for me to share this? And I suppose for me, one of the things that I found really, really helpful is knowing that there's the Association for Christian Counselors, there's the Muslim Counselor and Psychotherapist Network. And so I know that there's these other mental health professionals who are open about their faith, and that gave me a sort of sense of comfort of, do you know what, maybe it's okay to be open about this. And I suppose also hearing what you were saying about rituals, that really resonated with me. I have a big love of rituals. They're something I really, really respond well to. I know that when I qualified as a counselor, a part of that celebration was an ending ritual to mark the end of that journey. And I wrote about that in a journal called Thresholds, writing about the connection between pagan rituals and therapeutic endings, because there's a grief theorist, William Worden, who talks about the 4 tasks of grief. And I don't want to give a theory lesson, but one of the parts is about doing something to really sort of symbolize and mark that ending. And that certainly resonates with me. I know that Dr. Vivian Crowley, who's our keynote speaker for this conference, is also a psychologist and has written in her book Wicca in, I think it was 96, about Wiccan initiatory rituals and how that works in terms of psychology and how that affects our mind. And so I think there's a lot of connections there. But I suppose something else I hear there is the therapist needs to be open to it.
Yeah. And really show, like, maybe sometimes going the extra effort to show that they genuinely are accepted, and that's okay. Maybe not overboard, but like, because you're already kind of facing that kind of barrier.
Yeah,
you've definitely got to be really open. You've really got to, you've really got to not be able to show any facial expressions if somebody says something that to you seems abnormal. And I say, I'm really sorry, but I hate the word normal. It's one of my pet hates, is because no one that ever comes through my door is normal, but yet nobody is abnormal. They just happen to be in whichever part of this where we are is where they are. It's just the way it is. I think society tries to find a normal. And I think that's got a lot to do with what we're talking about today, is we don't fit the normal as such, but what is normal? And that's a whole new discussion for another day. So I think that's what we need to do, just try to get away from, I always try to accept everybody and anybody for whatever beliefs they have, be it Christian, be whatever, be it pagan, be it Muslim beer. And I'm not going to list any more in case I miss anybody out. So we'll just put it down that list, as I say. You've got to accept it and just work from there, and try and get to understand what their beliefs, what parts of their beliefs you can actually use to help them. You're saying ritual can help some people by putting an end to something. Sometimes it could just be deep meditation, depending on which one it is. You can use people's belief systems to actually help in their recovery from whatever the problem is, irrespective of what their belief systems are. You just got to try and work your way around it and find out more about it. So that's what I said. That's what I think about that. So yeah.
I loved what you were saying about this thing of no one who comes through is normal or abnormal. They're a person, and that connects to both my my primary modality is person-centered, and so I have this very, very core belief that every person is unique and experiences the world in their own way, and that also connects to the pagan ideas that I have grown with around each person's individuality is something that can be beautiful and celebrated. And so that's something, again, where sort of faith and therapy collide for me. They sort of, I almost picture how plants can grow intertwined and they're not necessarily in conflict with each other. Sometimes they can be really supportive of each other as they grow and flourish.
Mhm.
And I'm also hearing what you were saying about being able to work with someone's faith as a way of helping their mental health. And that sort of leads very nicely into the next question that I had for us to explore, which was, do you think it's possible for a person's faith, such as paganism, to be a supportive factor in mental health treatment and in supporting someone's mental health?
Definitely, I've already said it. I think it's one of the biggest things. A strong belief system, irrespective of where it comes from, is a strength, and that's where the word, where you keep, and we're always looking for strengths within someone to help that person grow. And however they do it, and however we can help them, if it's through ritual, as I said before, or if it's through meditation or whatever particular part of their religious beliefs that they believe in, if we can help them to appreciate that part and use that to pull the rest of their mental health back into line, that's what we need to go forward with it. I'm a solution based. That's what I am. It's where can we get the person to? It's not where they've been or where they are now. It's where do you want to be? Tell us where you want to be, and let's see if we can find some tools, either in my toolbox or in your religion's toolbox or in your ritual toolbox, so we can get you to where you want to be. I do use some of the ritual stuff in some of my treatments with certain clients. You've picked what you need for the client at the time. So yeah, that's my little bit of say. So back onto the rest of the team.
Yeah, I mean, as a community worker, I just think people being in any form of community where they can find belonging is incredibly helpful for someone's mental health. It's quite interesting in terms of paganism as well. I, by chance, happened to meet fellow pagans through similar interests I have, through environmentalism, through the music I liked. For some reason, ended up gravitating to people who are also pagans. And it's really funny, we've been friends for a year and then we all were kind of not so open about that, and then all realized we were. Really funny. So it's sometimes also that thing of like, birds of a feather flock together. Like when you find someone with similar interests and similar values, you realize you also have other things in common, and it's a great way for network building, friendships. That kind of community is important. I mean, that's standard on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which also was taken from Indigenous people in Native America, which we should recognize.
Yes.
And also, but isn't that interesting how that their culture was very spiritual in their Indigenous culture, and that has been so beneficial in psychology. Yet, like, psychology and spirituality is so intertwined from deep roots, and a lot of the time, spiritual practices hold these roots of community and really engaging with the many different factors of ourselves in a way that necessarily isn't saying that we have a problem we have to fix. It's about more engaging with these different parts of ourselves and using them in different ways. And I do find that in paganism, something like anger is not necessarily seen as a bad thing. You know, there's a lot of like gods and goddesses around those emotions, and also there's a lot of freedom to express yourself in many different ways. And I'm kind of rambling here, but yeah, I just think spirituality and therapy are very much intertwined.
Yeah. And I sort of feel like I should acknowledge that thing you mentioned about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, because a lot of people don't know that that was stolen from Indigenous people. And that is something we should acknowledge. And working towards anti-racist and anti-discriminatory practice is something that is another very, very important conversation in both paganism and mental health, and definitely something to be continuing to work on. And I suppose I'm also hearing about all these things around that, yes, it can be helpful to engage with these emotions instead of perhaps avoiding them, running away from them. I suppose for myself, there was a beautiful systematic review. So it was, I think, 30,000 different studies that were included in this big piece of research about the impact of spirituality or faith on the treatment of depression. And it was Bonelli et al. 2012. I could be slightly wrong with the year, but it showed that for a significant number of people who had a faith or spirituality, that that was a supportive factor in their recovery for depression. And I find that really, really interesting that we've got sort of psychology evidence to support the use of it, of faith and spirituality as a supportive factor for people. I'm also reminded of there's a brilliant book around working with risk called Working with Risk, which is about how we work with people who may be in crisis or experiencing thoughts around self-harm or suicide. And there's sort of all different things that could be supportive factors. And I very much consider faith to be, if that's something that helps that person, then I consider it to be a supportive factor. So there's something there for me. I just want to share. There's a story of the Greek goddess Hecate, how when Persephone was kidnapped and taken to the underworld, she heard the screams, and when Demeter was asking for help, she was the one who came to her and said, "Here's what I heard." And something about that story of Hecate is then the person who walks with Demeter to the underworld. She walks alongside her with the torch, sort of helping to light the way, but it's Demeter who chooses the path. And then afterwards, she's also the one who accompanies Persephone on her annual journey to the underworld. And for me, that very much connects to this idea um, around the therapist role of I can walk alongside a person and I might have a torch which can show them the different options, and it's their choice of what path we take. And there's something very much quite spiritual in that for me as well, which I really resonate with. And certainly ritual or other techniques like meditation can be really helpful in that work with people, whether it's community or groups or individually. I think if it's something that those people want to use, it can be helpful. Sorry, I'm aware I'm waffling a little, but yeah.
But I think one of the big things is, as you say, groups. People always work better in groups. if they've got a group of people, there's mutual support, there's positive interaction. I will, if anybody that knows me will say I was going about the 3 Ps: positive actions, interactions, and thoughts. So positive interactions, the more you can be working with people and along with people, the more they will keep you on the right track. It's also one of the first signs that somebody's struggling. So out in the pagan community, I'd like to say, keep an eye on the people that slip away from your groups. You know, that person we used to go to every meeting there was, or you'd catch them on the Zooms, and suddenly they're not there, or the camera's off, or they don't. That's the ones to keep an eye on, just see if they are slipping away, because that's one of the first signs is losing that positive interaction when they probably need it the most. And yeah, that's something I would say is just definitely working within groups is great for people. So yeah.
And sort of connecting with people, checking with people who maybe stop coming to the events and things can be really supportive. And I suppose that also connects back to other things around with online. You can connect so much easier with people across the world who have similar ideas. Lucia, I know you mentioned before we started about witch talk and things like that. And sort of people being able to find connections all across the world now.
Oh, it's amazing. Yeah, amazing. It's not uncommon for me. I mean, I do a lot of work with in the States, so it's not uncommon for me to be talking to somebody in Cincinnati or Florida in the afternoon, or talking to somebody in a kibbutz in Israel in the morning, and in the very early morning talking to somebody in Hong Kong. It's just amazing how you can speak to people all over the world and get so many different ideas and so much stuff. There's so much information, and there's so many people out there that are really interesting. So yeah, there's not so much an excuse anymore for not getting that interaction. So as I say, just use it. And there is so many really spiritual people out there. Even working in a mixed, like not going to pagan particularly sites or etc. There is so many people that spirituality is there, and in great bundles of all sorts of strange and combinations that you wouldn't believe. So it's just, yeah, it's great to get out there and look about them and find them.
I think even though in-person interaction isn't replaced by online interaction, certainly during the pandemic, when I could like go on to social media sites and find online communities of people who were similar to me, that was so helpful for getting me through that, because that was very isolating. And I think like sometimes some people deal with things like depression and that kind of thing because real horribly traumatic experience, but sometimes it's just because people are lonely and they don't have that social engagement, and that finding community can kind of be one of the most powerful things for people. But at the same time, we need to remember that spirituality also isn't necessarily a cure for all mental health reasons. You know, if people have specific traumas or specific disorders, like having that mental health like professional support is very helpful.
Absolutely, I really agree with you that while these can be supportive, there are times where medication is really, really helpful for people, or professional mental health, whether that's a counselor, a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a hypnotherapist, whatever that may be. There are times where absolutely I really hear what you're saying, which it feels like that's really important to also acknowledge. And also, I suppose, touching on just that not every group is right for everyone, and some groups are not good. And also even without disclosing anything too much, some traditions have various ceremonies, rituals, initiations that can reactivate trauma, and that's something that perhaps needs to be thought about how do we ethically look after people who want to go through that experience? How do we support them to do that, and what do we do if something happens?
And I would say that in conversations with other pagans, I think there is a kind of, I don't know, sometimes a conflict between, because a lot of modern, like say something like Wicca, for instance, that was very much a part of it was it was quite subversive to the kind of society it grew up in, which was like very kind of more conformist, 1950s, 1940s, 1950s, and having that freedom, going back to nature, that kind of thing is inherent to a lot of these practices. But also, how do you balance that with also trigger warnings, safety, having communication in a group without it becoming too rules-based and rigid, and still have the fluidity for making people feel like their space to be free is also protected.
Yeah.
And it's really difficult. And although I'd like to say that I like to think that paganism is very accepting, in the end of the day, pagans are still people with all their different ideas and conflicts, etc. And you're always going to get fallouts or whatever in any group. So that you have to also be aware of, especially when we are facing like new ways of approaching mental health, new ways of being inclusive that are still in development. And I do think that all religions are trying to take this on board, but it's still a process that has to be gone through.
Yeah, I suppose for me, something I think about when we think about rules and things like that and boundaries, I suppose for me, there's something about explaining it in sort of, again, sort of touching on not just Wicca, but lots of different traditions have a sacred space, or you create a circle, or and that's designed to be special. For some, it's to keep energies in, for others, it's to keep something out. And I suppose for me, there's something about thinking about boundaries with a group who are practicing together, sort of thinking of it like this is like creating the circle. And by creating that sacred space where you've agreed these sort of limitations or these sort of rules, there's that freedom to play within that. There's that freedom to express within that. That's sort of create that circle. And so I suppose I would love to hear what would you love for mental health professionals to know? What do you think would be helpful for them to know or to think about in relation to paganism and mental health?
I think probably the biggest thing would be for them just to take a little bit of time to find out something about paganism, and I know it's very difficult because it's got so many forms. Pagan, it's a very small word for a very big group of people that do all sorts of different things. But just for mental health professionals to sort of take the time as they would if they were dealing with, if they were normally dealing with Christian people and they suddenly had a Muslim coming along, they would probably take a little bit of time to find out a little bit about it, just to make sure there was nothing they said that was going to be wrong. And I just wish sometimes mental health professionals would just take that little bit extra time, just to make that effort, as they would with some of the more mainstream religions. So that's what I would suggest. That's my kind of thing. I would say there needs to be more knowledge spread amongst the mental health professionals.
Yeah.
I think also there is so much writing on anti-discrimination and inclusion, and effectively, especially focusing around religion. And if paganism, that is someone's religion, just use the same approach as you would anyone else, and make sure that you're aware of that also it's not just any religion as such. It's not a mainstream religion. It's one of the big small religions in the UK, and understanding the challenges with them in identifying in a smaller religion too.
Yeah, I suppose I sort of really relate to what you've both said about doing more learning about things. And yes, that can be complicated with pagan because a Hellenic practitioner will be very, very different from a Norse practitioner potentially. So there's a lot of things there. And also, I really resonated with what you were saying, Gia, about there's a lot of research and material about equality and diversity. Um, One of the books that really comes to my mind a lot that came out last year, I think it was, yeah, it was 2021, was Intersections of Privilege and Otherness in Counseling and Psychotherapy by Dr. Dwight Turner. And that's a really fantastic resource around doing some of that work around anti-discriminatory practice, because not just for paganism, but also for people who experience racism, for people who experience sexism, homophobia, transphobia, ableism. Awareness of all of these things are things we need to work on as professionals, so that we can do the best for the people who come to work with us, I feel. Yeah.
I think another thing is also distancing your ideas about paganism from the media stereotypes as well. I mean, I love Midsummer as much as the next person, but it doesn't really paint us in the best light. Also, like the Wicker Man, etc., there's a horror trope within our religion, and that's why people are scared of us, and that is not the reality. That is a really hard. Well, they're these stereotypes which might be fun to watch or whatever, but actually affect real life people in terms of their way to be accepted in society. And there needs to be more information about paganism so people aren't scared of us, because it's not a nice feeling to feel like you're something that's feared.
Yeah.
When you're not doing anything wrong.
Yeah, being stereotyped and feared and all this sort of misinformation about what we practice and who we are. Yeah, absolutely. That feels really important to learn about that, to unpack. Yeah.
Definitely, as I say, open mind, no matter what's going on. Just keep your mind as open as you possibly can be when you're working with anyone. There's so many differences. As I said, nobody's normal. No one in this world. There's probably there might be somebody that actually does sort of fall into the, depending how you worked at where normal was, there's bound to be somebody in the middle somewhere that actually falls into that one person is normal, because they've got half of the, everything just ties into them just being normal. They're only half as angry as most people, and they're only half as paranoid. They're only, they're right in that middle spot. But it's not everybody. It's just a single. We are all different. And even he's different from everybody around them, because everybody's away from that mean person. So yeah, I think just need to have an open mind about when we're dealing with anyone. And I think if the people out there that are looking for therapists, if they can find therapists that are open-minded about the way they treat them, that is what they need to be looking for. And there's hundreds, if not thousands, and probably tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of us out there. You're going to find a fit. So just look and see.
Yeah, I love that thing about keeping your mind open. I loved when you said that. And I think you're right about there are therapists and community leaders and groups that people can connect with, and it might not be that the first person you contact is the right fit, and that's not specific to people who are pagan. That's just in general. You can meet a therapist and it just doesn't quite click. That's okay. That's okay. There are other people out there, and I suppose for me, for any professionals who are unsure around paganism, mental health, please do get in touch with me, because that's sort of one of the main things I do as the mental health being officer for the Scottish Pagan Federation. I'm happy to speak with other mental health professionals around how do we work with these issues, because I think it would be good to have that resource if it's needed.
And as I say, any good mental health professional should have a huge list of other mental health professionals that if they feel that person isn't the best fit, they can move that person on to. I'm often asked, why do you keep connecting with different mental health professionals? Are they not competition? Well, they're not. They're a resource. That if I can't help that person, as far as I'm concerned, what I do, yeah, one, I've got to keep myself fed and watered, so there's that side to it. But I do it because I like to see the results. And if I don't see the results coming from me, I would much rather put that person onto somebody else who's going to get the results. And I think any mental health professional worth their salt should have a list of people behind them that they can say, well, actually, you and me are not quite gelling the way I'd like to see it happen. There's this guy over here, or this woman over there, or this organization who will be able to put you in touch with these other people. Just go down that road. And I think that's one of the big things is, as a mental health professional, you've got to be able to say, we need to move you to somebody who's probably a better fit for you or can help you easier and quicker than I can.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, that's one of the biggest things.
I would agree with that. There's something in the BACP ethical framework about working within our competency, and it might be that that person's what they're needing to work through is something that I'm not the right fit for, and the ethical and appropriate thing to do is for me to be very honest with that person about there's these people who are more appropriate for this kind of support. And I think that's really important for us as professionals to remember about. Sometimes the most ethical thing to do is to refer on to somebody who's more appropriately experienced and qualified.
And to do it very sympathetically. Make the client really feel that you're doing it because that is what the client is in the best interest of the client, not you're getting rid of them because you can't, for whatever reason you're gelling. It's to make them feel that you're moving them because it's for very much in their own best interest.
Yeah, the client, the person who we're working with, it should always be in their interest. Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm aware we've only got sort of 5 minutes left, so I'm just wondering if anyone has any sort of final thoughts, anything, any last things. I know, Lucia, you'd also mentioned about something from your father that you were hoping to share.
I kind of already shared it earlier on, but basically the main thing is that the main kind of things he wanted to say were that is to reassure people that there's so much training within psychological training today and therapy that discrimination is not something anyone should fear from the pagan community when trying to seek help. And there are so many people who are non-judgmental and really welcoming. And also there's a lot of pagans, as we know, working as therapists too. So yeah, as we can see in this chat. So it's actually, and it's becoming more and more known, and diversity is something that's also very much celebrated. So no one should feel uncomfortable. That should not be a barrier for people to seek therapy. And also but also he wanted to let me know, like, when people are trying to engage with pagan communities, it might be great for their sense of mental health to be a part of a community, but you might not find the community that fits you right straight away. So sometimes it takes a bit of searching because not all groups are perfect, not everyone gels with everyone. And if you find a community that is actually affecting your mental health badly, it's best to leave and find another one, because there are so many different communities out there that you can engage with. It's just a matter of really keeping connected, and you can do that through the Pagan Federation. There's so many different contacts, and that's why these organizations exist. Also, in terms of like for young people, I only know in terms of like student services, there's a lot of chaplaincy kind of help. Jean, who invited me, she's the pagan chaplain for Edinburgh University, and really if you feel alone, you can go to these institutions and that kind of support to ask advice. And as you said before, the BACP actually has spiritual sections to therapy, and there are all these networks out there. It's just a matter of finding the one that works best for you for the betterment of your mental health so that you can feel happy and fulfilled.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And Archie, do you have any final thoughts?
Final thoughts. Don't be alone. Don't be afraid to speak to someone. Don't be afraid to seek help. The Pagan Federation is here. Just go out there and find somebody to talk to. And if you don't find the right person the first time, don't be disheartened, because most mental health professionals will feed you on to some other place that is more appropriate for you. And sometimes the groups that you're involved in can be detrimental. It's just, yeah. But as I say, by and large, positive actions with people or interaction with people is the best thing you can possibly do. And I say, don't be afraid of being alone, because there's so many people out there with mental health problems.
Yeah, I really love that thing of you're not alone out there. There are people who can relate to your experiences of the world.
Yeah. I mean, my catchphrase is, no one's broken, they've just lost the instruction manual to their mind. That is my catchphrase. So, you know, we're not broken. Just if you need the help to get that instruction manual back, there's people out there that can help you. Okay.
Thank you. And so I suppose my final thoughts around it. I certainly believe that these are compatible, that someone's faith, spirituality, and mental health can support each other and can be really helpful. And I really encourage other professionals to talk about spirituality, to talk about where your ideas around faith and mental health have came from, and to sort of analyze that. And for people in the community, absolutely, you're not alone, and there are people that you can reach out to. And I'm aware that I am one of them in my role as mental health and wellbeing officer for the Scottish Pagan Federation. You can contact me by emailing mentalhealth@scottishpf.org. So that's a way to get in touch with myself. So I just want to really thank both Archie Hamilton and Lucia Harrington for coming along today. I am so grateful to have spent this time with both of you and to have heard your thoughts. Thank you so much again. And that is us. And please do enjoy the rest of the Scottish Pagan Federation conference. There are various talks and things coming throughout the rest of the day, and I hope to hear from people soon.